Wall Street closed higher today is because the San Francisco Fed press says, maybe it's time we start talking about at least slowing down or stopping all these rate hikes. And so joining us today, he's back. He decided to come back. We're very grateful for that. He's the Regional Outreach Director for the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, Ron Wirtz. Ron, welcome back to the show. It's great to see you, my friend.
Great to be back, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to come back.
Yeah, I really want to jump more into sort of the local economy. We'll get to that in a moment. But first,
Sure.
yesterday, Philadelphia Fed Prez says, hey, I think we're going to stay aggressive. We're not seeing much happening here with the CPI numbers, with inflation. We need to stay aggressive with raising the rates. And then today, the San Francisco Fed, now keep in mind, she's in Silicon Valley, so maybe that's why she said this, but she said, hey, maybe we start talking about lowering rates or at least not raising them as rapidly. Who's right?
Nobody's right. I think what's going to happen, I think what you have to remember, what your listeners need to remember is FOMC, there are 19 decision makers in there. Not everyone gets a vote, and we can kind of talk about, how votes are constructed. But basically, there's 12 votes, but there are 19, there are 19 decision makers that get some input into that decision. So all 12 of the district banks, all the presidents are there, and then all 7 of the board of governors. So there's, as you might expect with any group of 19 people, especially when you look at how volatile the economy is and all of the different signals and all of the different data, not everyone's going to agree. But they get in that meeting and they will decide as a group on where monetary policy should go. I think the Fed's been very clear. Inflation control is our number one task right now. And while I think presidents and the board of governors might disagree to some degree, to small degrees, about how aggressive we should be. I think, and when we should start peeling back. I think right now our immediate goal and our immediate actions are probably higher. I think they've been very clear about that. In terms of when we back off, I think we're going to let the data show that. So I don't want to say one is right or one is wrong. We're very data driven. They've communicated that rates are going to go higher. When we pull back, I think we're going to be looking at a lot of data, talking to a lot of businesses about what they see in the economy, making that decision later and not now.
The next Federal Reserve meeting is November 1st and 2nd. What do you think we're going to see come out of that? Meaning, how many basis points are they going to raise it?
We talked about this last week, Chris. I'm not going to project what we are likely to do. I think rates are going higher. The 19 folks in that room know a lot more about what should happen, so I'll have to pass on any
That's fair.
actual prediction.
Probably a good move, seeing what Jerome Powell does to the markets, right? So I do want to get into the local stuff, but one question I wanted to
Yep.
ask you last week that I didn't get a chance to was just how, help me and our audience understand, like, how does the Federal Reserve create money?
How does it create money? Well, basically, what it is doing is it can essentially put money in the economy by virtue of reducing rates and putting money into the economy, um, simply by fiat. That's what we have. We have a fiat money system. It has value because if I give you a dollar, you believe it's worth a dollar. There's a lot more theory behind it. Frankly, I'm not a monetarist, so I wouldn't be the right person to tell you about kind of the monetary theory of money. But it can, by virtue of having the authority to, if that makes sense.
It does. And for example, there are a certain number of banks that can say to you, hey, look, we need to purchase more treasuries, and then they can just sort of create it that way, and then they make money off the margins, if you will. I mean, is that
Mhm.
a fair assessment on my part? Am I tracking this somewhat
Right.
correctly?
Yeah. I don't want to make it too complicated because even there is a little bit of faith that's involved in terms of the Fed creating money and then being able to take it out. That's what we do when we raise and lower interest rates. When we lower it, we're essentially creating liquidity so more money can get out into the economy because we can produce money. We're the only organization that can produce money. We're the only organization that can take it out. And so that's what we're doing when we try to either goose the economy to grow a little bit stronger. That's what happened after the Great Recession. We wanted to try to encourage people to borrow. We were making rates low and we were pumping money into the economy also through quantitative easing. So when we were buying all those securities and to keep mortgage rates down. And we can talk a little bit about that's how our balance sheet got large, and as our balance sheet goes up, that means more money in the economy. When we're doing quantitative easing, we talked a little bit about this last week. Quantitative easing is essentially when those securities come due, and so that security is essentially paid off, then we're not going out and buying that same security out in the open market. So our balance sheet is going down a little bit. So there's two things kind of at play here: interest rates and our balance sheet in concert with each other. We talked a little bit about that last week.
This may be a fair assessment. It may not. I think some people think that people, at the Federal Reserve just push a button and money gets created. Is it that simple?
Well, no, it's not that simple, but it's not inaccurate to say the Fed creates money. That is how we are trying to influence an economy that is stable over time. Because really, why we created the Federal Reserve, if you go back in history, is we had lots of we had lots of volatility in our economy. And basically, what the reason we created the Fed, there are a couple reasons. We can talk more about it, but one of the reasons is for financial stability. And so we needed some organization that could kind of come in and kind of take the top off the market if necessary, because things were getting a little bit too speculative. Okay. And then on the bottom, when things really fall through the floor, you need some kind of financial net underneath the financial system, because the financial system kind of underpins everything else. And that's really why the Fed was created. So and we can talk a little bit more about the history if you're interested. But really, that's kind of why the Fed has the authority to create money and to take money out of the economy.
Yeah, Ron, maybe we'll have you back. We'll dive more into this. I think what you just said is really, really powerful. Like, hey, Chris, the money, the financial system is really the underpinnings of everything else. Like that is a big, big statement. I think most people would
Mhm.
say probably some veracity to that. So let's go to that next time we have you on.
Okay.
Let's dive into more the local stuff because I know that you and President Kashkari do a really, really good job. And I don't even know all the details. If you want to explain this, it'd be great. But a really good job of going into local communities within your district,
Hmm.
specifically Minnesota, North Dakota, and getting feedback from business owners and
Right.
CEOs. And so, what I'd like to know from you, what's the biggest concern on the minds of business owners and CEOs right now as you're going out and having these conversations within our
It,
local community? Sorry,
sure,
within
sure.
North Dakota, Minnesota.
For the most part, I think if we were to poll people in North Dakota, businesses in North Dakota, I think you'd probably have to divide it, west and east. West, I don't think there's any question it's about energy markets, and how we are, how if prices are going to remain and whether growth is going to continue there. Right now, it is climbing back slowly. In the eastern part of the state, I would associate it much more with kind of what I hear in most other places. And generally speaking, what we hear is can't find labor. Inflation obviously is a concern. Supply chains were a problem, and they still are. I shouldn't say they were. They are. What we have been hearing recently is that they are starting to improve in real tangible ways. Um, I would say because of inflation, I think some businesses are also a little bit more worried about paying higher interest rates on finance for operations or for capital expenditure. So I would say those are kind of the big issues that we have been hearing really for the last 2 years.
Now let's take it to people's dinner tables. If you're just joining us, Ron Wirtz, he is the regional outreach director for the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. He and President Kashkari, the president of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, do a really, really good job. If you go to their website, they've got a lot of great data there as far as what's on the minds of people within our local community here. And so you obviously are pouring over a lot more data than the average person, Ron. And I'm curious, based on what you're seeing, what jumps out? And again, this is for the average Joe and Jane, North Dakota,
Mhm.
Minnesotan. What's the most troubling piece of data that you're seeing? You said, "Hey, Chris, not many people are talking about this, but boy, the people right now listening, they need to know about this and how it's going to impact their dinner table."
Well, I don't. This is no surprise. I would say the most troubling thing right now is our ability to control inflation and get it down to back to our 2% target. We talked a little bit about this last week. I would actually flip the question, if I can, a little bit on you, and I would say the thing that has been most surprising to me is a good thing, and that's that we keep hearing about businesses hiring. We happen to have been in a small rural area in northern Wisconsin called Rhinelander. We had a roundtable with a number of businesses, probably 12 or 14, a lot of manufacturers, and we Neil asked the question just straight out. It's like we know that GDP, gross domestic product, has been declining the last 2 quarters. But what are you seeing in terms of your own business and whether or not you're hiring? And to a person, they were, businesses maybe not as good as it was, but it's healthy, and we are still hiring. And the data has really backed that up. We also do a lot of pulse surveys. In fact, we get responses from North Dakota businesses on that. We'll be doing other surveys coming up here shortly that'll involve North Dakota businesses. And not that everybody's hiring or hiring at the same pace, but on net, we are still seeing, and the numbers have showed it recently, we are still seeing employment growth. And that is a really positive signal for the economy overall.
Can I ask you an ignorant question? We got about 60 seconds left. What's a
Sure.
pulse survey?
Pulse surveys, well, without going into too much detail, we do very regular surveys that go out to a much larger group. Um, because we don't want to over survey everybody. What we do with a pulse survey is first of the month, we have a database of businesses. In fact, if anyone listening wants to be a part of this, give Fed some feedback. I would love to get an email, put you on that list. But we send it out to kind of I got to forget how big our sample is, 400 or 500 businesses, cross section of businesses. We just hear it's a really short kind of 2-minute survey that we ask them, how's sales orders? Are you hiring? A few other questions, and we do that once a month, and we get anywhere from 80 to 120 responses. Again, it's just another check from real businesses about what they're seeing on the ground, because we do get all of this data. We always want to be able to supplement it with frankly real